I wasn't ever bedbound, but I was housebound, and I could make it to a yoga mat. So maybe I was kind of yoga mat bound, but I would lie on a yoga mat for
So it's the first time I've heard that term.
yeah, I'm coining that one. So I did one of her online courses, and it was a game changer. Like in the course of a few weeks, I think the reason that I had quite a big quantum leap in my recovery because I had been practicing calming my nervous system for so long without any perceptible shifts. But when we're just calming our nervous system or being mindful around our symptoms, but we don't have the kind of knowledge that the symptoms themselves are perpetuated by the nervous system, then ultimately what we have there is a very effective coping strategy.
So many people reach out to me saying things like,
I am doing everything I can to stay calm.
I am meditating, I am grounding, I am pacing.
So why am I still stuck?
if you've ever wondered why regulation tools help a little, but don't actually shift the whole system, why symptoms keep firing even when you seem to be doing all the right things, this interview is for you. We're going to look at what happens when the brain puts you into full shutdown, how predictions override reality, and why some people only get better once they uncover deeper emotional patterns driving their nervous system. So, if you're looking for clarity, real explanations, and some practical next steps when nothing seems to be working for you, this conversation I think will land for you. And if this is your first time joining, welcome. I'm Raelan Agle, and here we explore the science, stories, and strategies that help people move out of chronic symptoms and into a life that finally feels like their own again. And today I'm joined by the incredible Dr. Jake Hollis, a clinical psychologist joining us from Brighton, England. Before his 5-year journey with chronic symptoms began, Dr. Hollis lived a high intensity life, doing international work for UN, supporting refugees, moving through demanding academic programs until a perfect storm of infections, burnout, and personal stress collapsed his system into shutdown. And what makes Dr. Hollis's story and insights extra valuable is the combination of personal experience and deep scientific training that he brings to understanding why these conditions happen and how the brain, body, emotions, and immune system intertwine in ways that most of us were never taught. If you've ever felt confused by your symptoms, like who hasn't, or have been afraid of pushing forward and going about it the wrong way, again, who hasn't, or just are unsure of what's missing from your recovery journey, this is a conversation that you don't want to miss. You are going to absolutely love Dr. Hollis. So let's dive in. Dr. Hollis, I am so excited to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, Raylan. It's a real pleasure.
So, looking forward to picking your brain. You have such an incredible combination of personal and professional background, making you just an ideal person to have this discussion. And I know there's a lot of things that were practical things we're going to get into for people who are facing these conditions like ME/CFS and long COVID. But it would be wonderful to hear about how your personal journey has impacted where you are now and the work you do professionally. So how did
Yeah,
that start?
I mean that's the question, and another question is like where to start because
Yeah.
as we know, having watched your channel, and I'm such a big fan of yours and the work that you do. Sometimes we think there's a clear-cut start point for our illness, and
Mhm.
it's only in hindsight that we look and a bit further back. So I guess it would probably be valuable to acknowledge that, growing up, I think I was quite low in self-esteem. I was quite a helper. That was a bit of a personality trait for me from a young age. And in particular, I also like learned to get self-worth through doing, through being productive and And at a certain age in my teenage years, I learned to get a lot of self-worth through academic achievement. And that became a big part of my identity, that drive. So I ended up going to a good university. I went to Cambridge, which, as you probably have heard of, is like crazy competitive. And I felt an awful lot of pressure there, felt a lot of imposter syndrome. And, that kind of way of living, that way of meeting the world kind of persisted. And I did further degrees. I got like a couple of masters and went on to do a doctorate and all that stuff. But I was very driven around my career and went on to work in international development and for the UN and all sorts of stuff like that. But I think fundamentally, I just never really learned to listen to myself, to listen to my body. And yeah, speaking of like when did the illness start? In hindsight, there were some early warning signs. So throughout my 20s, actually, I think I had IBS type symptoms,
Mm.
but I kind of normalized it. I didn't really think too much about it, as strange as it sounds to me now. I think having lived for a few years abroad and in Asia, I kind of just thought, hey, I got kind of deli belly or whatever, that's just part of living abroad, perhaps. But yeah, no, I developed bits and pieces. I got lots of viruses. I think my immune system was not what it could have been. But ultimately, it wasn't until I was back in the UK working as a mental health social worker that things really got worse. In fact, I guess it really started when I was actually finally on this training program to become a clinical psychologist. I've been working towards for several years. And by the time I started the doctorate, like I was already kind of burnt out. Um, and within the space of a few weeks, I got glandular fever or mono. My partner's mum died. And then the pandemic started. And yeah, so a bit of a perfect storm, right? And with the glandular fever, I just never really fully recovered. I felt pretty horrendous for a long time. I just felt ill and dizzy and kind of unable to stand and brain foggy. But it wasn't in my nature to listen to my body. I didn't know how to rest really. And because I was finally on this training program, I was damned if I was going to take extended leave. Like I would not allow that.
Yeah.
So effectively, I just pushed through, as so many of us do. And for the next couple of years, I was in boom and bust, really. I was working incredibly hard and then coming back and crashing and sleeping and not having a social life, that's for sure, but somehow muddling through. And it carried on like that for a while. And then eventually, I think it was like the third COVID infection I'd had, and the first two weren't pleasant, but the third one um, was like the mother of all crashes, right? That was when I shifted from kind of buzzy, tired, but wired energy into this kind of fugue state, this collapse, this dorsal vagal oblivion from which I couldn't really stand up anymore, at least not for very long. I could barely walk, and it really felt like my head was like imploding. Like it felt like viscerally, like it was stuck in a vice or something. It was just awful. And somehow around that time, I had somehow managed to qualify as a psychologist. So I kind of got to that goal that I'd been working towards. But ironically, I wasn't well enough to work. So for the next year, it turned out I couldn't work. Um, yeah, and I was kind of muddling my way through and really not able to do very much. I kind of came to define myself, from being someone who defined himself by being, productive and busy and helpful
Mhm.
to other people. I came to define myself as someone who couldn't really do anything. I couldn't read, I couldn't listen to music, I couldn't watch TV, all the stuff that you would ordinarily use to distract yourself
Yeah.
with, um, were inaccessible. So it was pretty bleak. I was, I wasn't depressed before I got ill, but I was certainly depressed as a result of that kind of limiting life.
What did you think was happening? when this
Yeah.
was going on? Were doctors telling you? Were you doing your own research?
Yeah, right. So this is the other embarrassing thing was like, I think it took me a long time to actually see a doctor, which is crazy in hindsight, but that was like the mode that I was in. I was a
Mhm.
helper. I wasn't someone who sought help. But I think it was actually one night, one of my symptoms was I needed to go to the loo all the time, and especially at night. And I had, I guess, POTS that I didn't realize it. So,
Mm.
going from lying down and then standing up, I suddenly felt very dizzy and I would kind of faint and pass out. And one night I kind of
Mhm.
thudded on the bathroom floor and woke up my partner, and she found me like passed out in a puddle of piss, basically. And she was like, "You have to go to the doctor." And I was like, finally, like, "Oh, okay, yeah, yeah. I think
Okay,
maybe
yeah.
maybe you've
There
got a
might be
point."
some flags here. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, which is kind of embarrassing. Like it took that much, but anyway, I did.
Yeah.
I guess partly because it was during the pandemic and it was hard to get appointments
Mm.
anyway. But they did all the tests that they tend to do. They did a whole battery of blood tests and other things to screen for any other kind of for any biological or physical explanation for my symptoms. But sure enough, as with most of your interviewees, there didn't seem to be anything wrong apparently. Um, so unfortunately, they kind of just left it at that. There wasn't really much else to be offered apart from, I think they said, oh, it's probably just post-viral fatigue. And obviously, I felt like, well, I could have told you that. That's just a description, right? And I'm aware of that, but what's to be done about it? But there wasn't anything to be done. So I kind of like, went on my way and tried to make sense of things as best as I could. I tried to read some papers and research about the Epstein-Barr virus and stuff like that. I couldn't really find anything that made any sense. Weirdly enough, though, one thing that had stuck with me was when I was training, before I was too unwell to work. I'd been working with survivors of torture, so asylum seekers and refugees, doing trauma-focused therapy. And one thing that really stuck out was their nervous systems, right, was so dysregulated. They were fluctuating. They were moving wildly between this kind of fight-flight activation and this shutdown, this dorsal vagal shutdown. They couldn't access a kind of safe and secure kind of parasympathetic. And whilst I had clearly not had anything like the experience of those people I'd been working with, it was still hard for me to ignore that something similar seemed to be happening in my nervous system. I was feeling, yeah, tired but wired, right? A lot of the time.
Mm.
And sometimes mainly just like completely tired and exhausted. I mean, tired doesn't cover it, does it? But shut down. So, I was clear that the nervous system had a role to play, but it's almost like a language that you can't quite speak. You're kind of trying to decode it. You're trying to understand it. Very confusing and overwhelming. And I'd like to say, well, Raelan, eventually I just worked it all out, but that's not how it was. I really had to seek help eventually.
Yeah. So what did that look like? How do you even know where to get help on something like this? Because nobody really is talking about in the conventional medical system, like, oh, it's a
Mm,
nervous system issue. Okay, here's what we're gonna do. So where
yeah.
where did you go for this? Where did you start looking?
Mhm. Well, for a long time, I was a little bit sniffy because I probably had a bit of an ego, and I was like, well, I'm a clinical psychologist now. And the only people I saw really offering help were people who call themselves health coaches. And my view has changed a lot now. And I have so much respect for health coaches and people who've been through their own journeys. But at the time, I think I was a little bit unsure. I had a lot of
Yeah.
credulity and faith in mainstream medicine. And I was like, well, I need to work with a doctor or, someone like that. But yeah, so that kind of was to my own detriment because of that block internally. I was kind of on my own for a long time, but because I was aware that my nervous system was involved, I was able to make use of ideas from my own work, from trauma therapy and in particular, just, practicing calming my nervous system. So I would lie for, I wasn't ever bedbound, thankfully, but I was housebound, and I could make it to a yoga mat. So maybe I was kind of yoga mat bound, but I would lie on a yoga mat for.
Sorry, it's the first time I've heard that term.
Yeah, I'm coining that one. Yeah, I'd lie on a yoga mat for hours every day, and I'd just kind of breathe into my symptoms. And I was into mindfulness. I knew that was valuable. And there was a therapy I liked called acceptance and commitment therapy, and a mindful practice from that was called making room. And that's where you kind of spend time with a feeling. It might be an emotion or a physical sensation, and you kind of track it, you notice it, and you bring mindful, curious, self-compassionate awareness to it. Weirdly enough, I think I was kind of doing a version of somatic tracking before I'd heard of somatic tracking. And something along there was clicking a bit. I knew something like the paradox of acceptance. I knew that if I could accept my symptoms today, then I might be creating the condition for my nervous system to calm down, and for the symptoms maybe to improve tomorrow. But I hadn't really formulated it. And so eventually I saw, it was one of those insomniac, like 3 a.m. moments where I'd been awake for like a few hours. And I'm pretty sure I was watching your channel. I was like desperately looking for help. And I think at that time, I really hadn't come across that many people talking about neuroplasticity and that sort of thing. And it was an interview with a health coach called Rebecca Tolan. I'm pretty sure that was your interview, right? Well, obviously she's done interviews with others, but you interviewed her, right?
I have multiple times, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, as you know, like she's amazing, and she's such
She is amazing.
Incredible communicator. And something about the way that she communicated and what she was saying, I had a bit of a Eureka moment, a bit of like a light bulb, because, she was putting things into words that, like I said, I just couldn't quite articulate to myself. But she was talking about how it was possible for physical symptoms to be perpetuated by the brain, by neural circuits, and how through things like graded exposure, we could create the conditions for our brain to unlearn this kind of freaked out, overwhelmed response. And in so doing, turn the volume down on symptoms. And just hearing that articulation itself, that was an intervention. This is what I always think is knowledge itself is an intervention, right? So almost physiologically, as I was watching that video, I was like almost feeling something kind of shift. I know that sounds a bit strange.
It doesn't sound, I just interject, it doesn't sound strange to me at all, because I hear this in so many people that I interview, and there are so many cases of people that say they read a book and they were better, or they watched some videos and they felt 50% better. So we've started calling them book recoveries or video recoveries. But when we look at all of these programs that work with brain retraining and nervous system regulation, it's always the first big piece is that education. Because once you understand it, that right there puts your nervous system at a little bit more ease. You're like, okay.
Yeah, no, 100%. The fact that Rebecca, of course, and yourself, seeing that conversation between two people who'd been there and who'd recovered themselves was like so profound. So she was talking about somatic tracking and emotional work, and it was so fascinating because intuitively I could feel the value of like emotional work, but ironically, despite being a psychologist, like I was still a bit like skeptical, like, it seemed like a bit woo-woo, right? So I wasn't quite on board yet, but as it happens, as fate would have it, she was running a course at the time, and I was like, sign me up. So, so I did one of her online courses, and it was a game changer. Like in the course of a few weeks, I went from being completely housebound to gradually moving out into the world again. Wow. And that was through somatic tracking and graded exposure. So funny because graded exposure is almost like the best evidence treatment in all of psychology. It's like what we do. It's our bread and butter for people with anxiety in particular. If you think about someone with like a phobia of dogs, you gradually expose yourself to a dog. You start by looking at a dog picture and then stand at one end of the park and then walk a bit closer. And the idea that we want to kind of create the conditions for our brain to learn that it is safe to do all these things again, very, very, very gradually in a one step forward, or rather 2 steps forward, 1 step back way. And it just made so much sense. And the kind of ethos of trauma therapy is not to overwhelm the nervous system by doing too much, too fast, too soon.
Mm.
And the same applied, right? So it just made so much sense.
It's helpful, or I'm always happy for people that have this background so that this information, you're able to take it in and start to take it seriously, I think, a little quicker than others that don't have that background. I'm just
Mm,
thinking when I had chronic fatigue syndrome, especially in the first couple of years where I was almost like pretty much completely laid out with a zillion symptoms and just thought my whole body was
mm,
broken and shutting down. And if someone told me that it was like a phobia, we're going to treat this like you have a
yeah,
phobia of life. I
yeah.
think, what are you talking about? Like, I'm not afraid of anything in life. I
Mm,
just, I go, go, go.
mhm.
It's a big leap when you think about where most of us are in our understanding of our bodies to getting to this place of this is what you need to do to get these horrible symptoms to stop.
Yeah, 100%. And obviously, the danger is when we start using analogies or comparisons with anxiety that we might give the impression that we're talking about a mental health problem, but
Hmm.
I really want to make it emphatically clear that that's not the case. But, at the same time, I would say that, anxiety and PTSD they're not purely mental health problems either. They're mind body as well. If you talk to someone with
Yeah.
PTSD and said, hey, I'm pretty sure your symptoms are physical as well as mental, they're not going to be like, how dare you? They'll be like, yeah, they are physical. Like my heart is going bananas. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, exactly that. It's like it's not that it's the same as anxiety, but it's also perpetuated by the nervous system, right? So it makes so much
Mm.
sense that rather than the symptom being an anxious or fearful experience, the symptom is, all these warning signs that are
Mm.
experienced as physical symptoms. So yeah, so that was huge. I did her course. I learned about somatic tracking and I practiced that diligently. And I have to say, I think the reason that I had quite a big quantum leap in my recovery at that point was effectively because I had been practicing like just calming my nervous system for so long. Like I'd been
Mm.
doing my yoga mat stuff for so long, for like months and months on end without any perceptible shift. So that it's important to say, because I know when I watch these
Mhm.
recovery stories, sometimes it just seems a bit too good to be true. Like, oh, I did this
Mm.
practice and then I got better. But, you know, it, it took a long time before that leap. And even after that leap, it still took a long time. Like, I was ill for 5 years overall. And at this point, it's probably about 3 years in. So I still had another couple of years before I felt fully
Mm.
recovered. I just want to emphasize that because I hear from people who are like, I tried curable or I tried brain retraining and it didn't work. And, you know, yeah, I really feel that. And I wouldn't want to give a false impression that it's like a quick fix.
So what was the biggest difference, do you think, between all of those months doing that yoga mat work? Because it sounds like you were doing incredible work to calm your nervous system, regulate your nervous system. And we talk about that being the
Hmm.
core of what we're aiming to do here. But for you, that wasn't shifting the needle
Hmm.
very much. So, what was missing from that approach that you needed
Hmm.
to add in that really started to make a difference with the symptoms?
Yeah, that is such a good question, Raylan. And it reminds me of something I heard from Howard Schubiner. So I want to credit him with this idea. But effectively, when we're just calming our nervous system or being mindful around our symptoms, but we don't have the kind of knowledge that the symptoms themselves are perpetuated by the nervous system
Mm.
and the brain, then ultimately, what we have there is a very effective coping strategy. We're being
Mm.
mindful around what is still potentially seen as an incurable illness that no one knows what to do with, the doctors can't understand, and that no one has any evidence based treatment for.
Right.
By contrast, if we take the leap to working with the hypothesis that actually there is a plausible, coherent explanation for my symptoms. And, I think previously I was in a place where I thought the nervous system was implicated, but I didn't really get that it was like maybe the central mechanism for the symptoms. I thought if I practiced this stuff, I could take the edge off my symptoms, but I didn't necessarily
Right.
think that it was going to cure them. So I think it's the knowledge that's come straight out of that neuroscience that, and maybe we'll talk a bit more about the nerdy stuff later, but it's fascinating stuff that, it's kind of bucks Western medicine, all its assumptions, which says that if you have physical
Oh.
symptoms, there is always a zero sum relationship with some structural or organic cause
Mhm.
in the body. But we know that's not true. That's what the science is saying. As strange as it sounds, it's entirely possible to have the most debilitating physical symptoms not being directly caused by structural or organic problems in the body, but rather perpetuated by the brain. And that does not lessen their reality or how debilitating they are, just means there's a different
Mhm.
mechanism. Doesn't mean it's in the mind. The brain is in the body. It's still a body related problem. Um, but as soon as I got my head around that idea, it was like liberating. It's like, okay,
Mhm.
I'm not broken. This is a problem of communication between different parts of my body and my brain. Yeah, so it's so empowering. And I would say that, does that answer that question? That was the real shift for me. Like I took a leap
It
there.
it does, and I'm just thinking about my own experience and some of the other people that I've interviewed, like, what really moves the needle to get those
Mm,
symptoms, to expand your capacity to do things and reduce your symptoms, and we always talk about the knowledge, and I think that's really important, and had I
mm,
had that knowledge, I'm sure that would have sped up my journey, but I think equally important is getting off the mat, because for me, I finally
mm,
started to get better when I started doing activity again and
mm,
accepting that symptoms were a part of the process and just being calm throughout it. I didn't know what a nervous system was. I didn't know what neuroplasticity was. I didn't know what brain retraining was. I didn't
mm.
have any of this language, and somehow I recovered. So I think having this
Yeah.
information is vital, and it helps people get there so much quicker than I did. But what really moved the needle for me was just getting out in the world, getting moving again, doing things. As I know, you've said
Yeah.
it was a big part of your journey as well. That's that
Oh,
gradual
yeah.
re-exposure to life. Yeah.
100%. And that's so good to hear as well, because it reminds me that actually, now, maybe I'm doing a little bit of hindsight bias because I know what I know now, you
Yeah.
know, like having like nerded out and read a lot of the science, a lot of the emerging science. Like my idea of what's going on is a lot more nuanced, but it's entirely possible to recover without having the most
Mhm.
sophisticated understanding. I think key is that there's some kind of faith or not at
Mhm.
all in a religious sense. That's not really who I am, but faith in the idea that, or an openness and a curiosity that there could be
Mhm.
a coherent explanation for why our symptoms appear. That doesn't necessarily mean that we have to be waiting for some biomedical cure to come along in order to recover, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I just accepted that having symptoms was a shitty part of the process. I didn't know why, but I
Mm,
came to see I can't get better without making myself occasionally feel worse, and something about just that acceptance, I think, did what my nervous system needed, just because I kind of
yeah.
finally stopped freaking out, and but yeah,
Mm.
anyways, I just
No, that's so
um
cool to hear. Yeah, it's like
yeah.
maybe a bit like that paradox of acceptance. Like if we accept what's here
Yeah.
today, we create the conditions for that to change tomorrow.
Yeah, and it really calmed my nervous system in
Mm,
retrospect, because until
mhm,
then I'd been in this panicky, I'm never gonna get better, what's going on? Is this gonna be
mm,
the rest of my life? I don't think I
mm,
can keep going like this, into a
mm.
belief that I was gonna get better, which
Yeah,
a calmness around the symptoms. Okay, they're normal,
yeah.
they're fine, they're not hurting me, and
Mm,
I can see the trajectory that I'm getting better.
right.
But yeah. So back to you. What happened for you from there?
Yeah, then I really, Rebecca Tolan had talked about emotional work, but there was a part of me that was still a bit resistant to that. Like, oh, maybe I'll just do the
Mhm.
somatic track, and that seems to be helping. But I think
Yeah.
eventually it became clear that just changing my relationship with the symptoms alone and gradually moving back into the world was not sufficient, to get to where I needed to get
Mm.
to. And I think I always knew there was stuff that I'd never really dealt with, but a particularly powerful experience was actually working with a craniosacral therapist. And that, for people who don't know, craniosacral therapy is a very gentle touch-based kind of somatic body work, effectively. So you kind of lie on like a massage type table, and your therapist will kind of just gently touch you, under your spine, around your central nervous system, effectively. And I had kind of a freaky experience where I just burst into tears within like the first few seconds of the session.
Wow.
And
Wow.
yeah, I started connecting with a lot of memories, a lot of trauma, a lot of stuff that had happened earlier in my life. And I did about 4 sessions with this person. And after each session, I just felt so much lighter. It's so interesting, right? Because as a therapist, my modality is talking, mainly. But this taught me something about it. It's not always essential that we say things out loud, that we can just connect to particular experiences and connect to them from a new perspective of safety. And
Mm.
we can have quite transformational experiences. So that was a big deal. Having said that, I also did a bunch of talking therapy as well. I'd been on like a waiting list in our National Health Service for like 9 months, and finally someone was able to see me. And when I did that, that was a game changer too. I realized that I don't know if you've heard this word, I was kind of alexithymic,
Mm.
which effectively means, this is another slightly embarrassing thing for a psychologist or a therapist to admit to, but means that I didn't really know how to read my own emotions, right? I didn't actually know how to notice and name and connect to them. I'd never really learned to do that. I'd been quite attuned for a long time to other people's feelings and experiences. But if you'd asked me what I was feeling, like I'd struggle. So actually just having
Mm.
therapy and having someone ask me what was going on inside of me, like, was deeply uncomfortable for a while, but also deeply healing and therapeutic, just to, it's like build a muscle. And maybe we could talk a bit more about this, but we talk about emotional suppression, and I think that's a big deal. But I've started thinking more about, for some of us, it might be that we've actively suppressed or repressed emotions, but for others of us, might be that we never learned to feel them in the first place, right? Which is kind of a weird,
Wow.
kind of weird.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah,
You are the first person to say that on this channel, and wow, does
right.
that ring true.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe they're two
Wow.
sides of the same coin. Like, we
They
don't need to
might
split
be,
hairs.
but it's an interesting way to think about it, because
Hmm.
repressing emotions implies we have some sort of awareness that something's coming up, but we're like, "Nope." Like, I'm
Yeah,
feeling anger or
exactly.
something, "Nope, we're gonna put that away. I'm feeling shame, I'm gonna put that away. I'm feeling grief, I'm gonna put
Yeah.
that away." But you're right, I think back to before I got
Mm,
CFS, and I've already forgotten the word that you said that it describes as, what is
yeah.
it?
Alexithymic.
Alexithymic. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
that yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I remember, like, as we're talking about it, I remember a moment in one of my first therapy sessions where me and my therapist were talking about something that happened when I was very young. And he asked me, like, what do you think it felt like? And I was like, I just have no clue. Like, I did not have the vocabulary.
Yeah.
And I think the word I said was strange. And he looked at me and was like, it sounds terrifying. And I was like, whoa, right? And just having someone to
Yeah.
name that and be like, oh, shit,
Yeah.
yeah, because if I was with one of my clients and they were describing something
Yeah.
like that to me, I feel like I'd know what it felt like. But there's this
Yeah.
weird thing where you can be a
Yeah.
stranger to yourself, but you can be hopefully quite empathic and connected to others, right?
Yeah.
And with the craniosacral therapy, a similar thing happened where, on the back of like this very emotional kind of cathartic, like purging of stuff, at the end of the session, the therapist said, that was powerful. Like, I got to say, when you came into the session today, I thought, no, this isn't like a guy in his mid 30s. This has the energy of a boy who's like 7 years old. I was like, that's freaky, because I was just thinking about something that happened when I was 7. Like, I don't know how she
Oh.
worked that out. Yeah, you can be quite disconnected from yourself and your own stuff that you've been carrying for a long time.
Yeah.
other stuff that came out was just like, being a helping professional for many years. And I had a kind of visual of all the people I'd worked with and all the stuff that I'd been carrying and hadn't realized, and just kind of letting it go. So yeah, I went from being a little bit of a skeptic to like fully embracing the emotional stuff. And that was a big deal as well.
So was that pretty much the full equation of what you needed to move past the chronic symptoms?
Um, Two more pieces of the puzzle,
Mhm.
briefly. One of them was, I got to a place where I could go back to work part time initially, and it was good. It was that graded exposure. It wasn't too much, too fast, too soon. It was just enough. I built my confidence and my capacity. I felt really good. But ultimately, unfortunately, because I care so much about public health and I care about our National Health Service, I like working for it, but it's not very well funded. It's quite
Mm.
political, but it's a sad thing. And because of that, the service that I was working in, which was actually a long COVID service, suddenly got loads of funding cut and loads of people lost their jobs overnight. And I'd been working in the psychology team, and there were like 6 of us. And then overnight, it was just me and one assistant. So I was the only
Wow.
psychologist in the team, and I was suddenly in charge of like the long COVID service, psychology service for like 2 large geographical areas of England. And it was like my first qualified job. Um, yeah, so it was too much, too fast, too soon. And I tried my best. I was a people pleaser, I self-sacrificing still. And I had a big relapse, sadly. Um, but ultimately, I'd learned enough about the importance of listening to your body that I wasn't going to carry on like that. So with a heavy heart, I quit my job. I quit another job in London because the commute was a bit much, and I set up my own practice. And I think ultimately sometimes we just have to make more kind of logistical, material decisions in our lives, and we have to create the conditions for a sustainable recovery, and not just a sustainable recovery, but just a sustainable life. I think
Mhm.
I'd just been normalizing living unsustainably for the longest time. So that was a big deal.
Normalizing living unsustainably. Wow,
Yeah.
I think that sums up virtually every
Mhm.
person I've talked to here in my own
Really?
experience. And it's still
Yeah.
a lesson I'm learning. You make a great point that this isn't just recovery, but it's
Mm.
for life. It's a hard habit to break of this, oh, I can just do it all,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
not realizing when does it end? How long
Right.
can I do this? Yeah. And what is the
Totally.
toll?
Yeah.
Um,
And so, sorry, just very briefly, like the final piece of the puzzle was,
mm,
having made all those changes and being like 90% recovered. I spoke to someone who'd recovered after 10 years, and she said, "Why only 90%? What stops you being 100%?" And I was like, "Well,
yeah.
I'm pretty good, but I still get some symptoms sometimes when I'm tired or stressed or, a bit overworked." And she was just like, "Jake, maybe you've been ill for so long that you've forgotten that those symptoms are normal, and that all people, when they're stressed, might get fatigue and headache and stuff." And I know it sounds simple and kind of basic, but and if anyone else had said it, I might have been a bit nonplussed and not impressed. But because she'd been through it herself, it was almost like the final piece of the puzzle just gently slotting in. And I just experimented from then forward with saying like, okay, maybe I am 100%. And weirdly enough, the more I said it, the more I felt it, and I didn't even get any residual symptoms after that. And maybe because I'm just living a very healthy and sustainable life now, where I do work hard. I actually see more clients now than I ever did in the NHS, but I also don't sit in boring meetings that make me feel
Yeah.
frustrated, and I'm not dealing with as much bureaucracy. Like, yeah, so effectively I live a healthy and full life, and sometimes I feel tired like everyone, but I don't get any symptoms that would make me feel at all concerned. So yeah, so now I'm 100%.
Incredible. So since then, I know, or during that process, and since then, you've done a fair bit of research around this. And so, what have you learned from that? What does
Mm.
psychoneuroimmunology, a term that I'm Maybe you can explain for us, and what does that tell
Mm,
us about these chronic symptoms?
yeah. Oh, love that question. Thanks, Raelan. Psychoneuroimmunology, it just rolls off the tongue, doesn't it?
Oh, it really does.
Yeah, as the name suggests, it's like a way of integrating different areas of the body. So we're looking at
Mm.
psychology and our nervous system and immune system. But if we were to give it its full name, it would be like psychoneuroimmuno endocrino socio and various other ologies. It's just like looking at everything
Yeah.
connected. Because I guess as much as mainstream medicine is miraculously brilliant at dealing with all sorts of like acute illnesses,
Mm.
I think it's fair to say that it falls down with non-communicable illnesses. And so I'm not even just
Yeah.
talking about ME, CFS, and long COVID. I'm talking about, diabetes and cancer and, all the 21st century illnesses that are the main kind of source of suffering in the world today, and especially in the Western world. Um, but why I think it's relevant to MECFS, I think it kind of goes back to what we were talking about before, that explanation, like how is it possible that we could have awful physical symptoms that weren't necessarily a direct result of damage to the body? One of the cool things about this integrated way of working is that it's looking at how, for example, the nervous system and the immune system are really communicating. So as it turns out, I think for the longest time, medics thought that symptoms, like all the things that we're familiar with, like fatigue and brain fog and pain and nausea and stuff like that, were somehow like the direct result of a virus or a pathogen in the body. But it's now really understood that they're not a direct result, that there's a difference between something wrong in the body, like a pathogen, and those symptoms, right? And what
Hmm.
actually is understood now is that the brain and the nervous system and the immune system and all the other systems in the body too are constantly having conversations. They're like monitoring the state of the body. And so when there is like a threat to the body, like a virus, it's the immune system that will like release these proteins called pro-inflammatory cytokines. They travel all the way to the brain and they signal the brain, hey, we're under attack. And this is all quite recent, like only about 15 years ago, we thought that the brain and the immune system were really disconnected. We thought that the brain was too important. It was immune privileged. But as it turns out, there's something called the blood-brain barrier. It turns out that immune cells can travel into the brain. Freaky, right? So they can directly say, hey, brain, we're under attack. And the brain, therefore, in combination with the immune system, will signal this alarm and will trigger what's called the sickness response. So the sickness response is this constellation of symptoms that we know, right? So when we think about it, it's not much fun feeling fatigue and ill and nauseous and sensitive to pain and sensitive to light and sound. But when our body is trying to fight a virus or a bacterial infection, it's an existential threat. So it makes sense. So the brain wants us just to shut down and to rest and recuperate. It wants all the energy inside the body to go towards the immune system to fight the virus. So it's really adaptive. We feel crap for a few days. The brain doesn't talk English, it talks fatigue and pain and nausea. So it works quite well, right? But, maybe the next piece of the puzzle then is like we know that it's possible that it's a difference, right? That the symptoms that the brain is creating is not the same thing as the virus, right? But why is it that sometimes we could have symptoms even long after the virus has passed? That's like a $1 million question, right?
Yeah. It still fascinates me today how I really didn't understand how symptoms were created. And I guess that's why the education piece is so important. I think most of us
Mm,
think the virus is making us feel unwell. And when you find out, wait, my brain is making me feel unwell as a
mm,
protection, it's doing this to me on purpose. Isn't there another way it could just tell me to sit still? But really, we wouldn't, right? We wouldn't. We'd go back to work, we do all the things, and we wouldn't rest and we wouldn't let our body heal itself. So, yeah, that's you've really expanded my understanding of how that process works. That's fascinating. I know something else that people are talking more and more about that I find fascinating is the neuroscience of predictive processing and how this helps us understand what is happening with conditions like ME/CFS and long COVID. So tell us about that.
Oh, yeah. Thanks, Raelan. So predictive processing is a bit complicated, I'm going to be honest. And sometimes even when I think about it, it makes my head hurt a bit. So I'm going to do my best to share the bits that are really relevant for us without worrying about the bigger picture. But maybe a good place to start is to think about like why we have brains. I know that's a big question, but essentially, like neuroscience says that the brain's main job is to keep the body in balance. It's almost like keeping a body budget. That's what this neuroscientist called Lisa Feldman Barrett says. Quite a nice
I love
analogy.
her.
She's cool, isn't she? Yeah. So
Yeah,
she's
she
saying
is.
like the brain's trying to help us to not spend more energy than it
Mm,
has. And it's also making all these decisions all the time about how to allocate resources. It's kind of keeping things in balance, homeostasis, and something called allostasis, which is keeping things in balance even in the face of stress and change,
mm,
right? Um, and it does this weirdly enough by building kind of working templates. The brain does like creates templates of how the world is and how the body is. And this is going to sound a bit sci-fi and a bit strange, but it also means that our experience of our body and experience of the world, what we see and hear and smell and taste, and what we feel in our body, is not just a clear-cut representation of the raw data traveling through our sense organs to the brain. It's like a combination between the brain's expectations and that raw data. I know that's so weird, right? But it starts to make sense if we think about it, because it pays to be thinking ahead, basically, right?
mhm,
If, for example, I can see someone looking kind of scary and walking slowly towards me, it's going to be kind of helpful that my brain is starting to predict about all the things that that might mean, how they might want to harm me. And even before anything has happened, it's activating my sympathetic nervous system, it's releasing cortisol, it's getting me ready to fight or flight, right? So thanks, brain. Like that prediction is very
yeah.
helpful. Um, and usually when things are working well and we're healthy, like the brain's quite flexible. Like sometimes it predicts things and it gets things wrong. And that's called a prediction error, where the gap between what it's expecting to happen and the
Mhm,
raw data traveling to the brain is quite big. And because of that, like the brain will learn from that and will update its working models of the world. Um, but unfortunately, in some circumstances, it's also entirely possible for the brain to become very, very rigid indeed and start to stick to its predictions about the world and the
mm,
body, even when the raw data says otherwise. So here we start to think about what might be going on for ME/CFS. So it just means that even if we feel pain or fatigue, it doesn't mean necessarily that there is definitely raw data from the body coming up to the brain saying, hey, we're under attack or something's wrong. And, when I think about those of us who get ill in the way that we do, more often than not, we have these cumulative stresses, these psychological, biological, and social stresses that we've been living with for so long. We've also been often like living our lives in unsustainable ways. We have these personality traits, these unsustainable ways of meeting the world, all of which kind of serve to undermine the brain when it's just trying to keep us in balance. And so eventually there's usually like a straw that breaks the camel's back, right? It's like often a virus, but it might be something else. And it's almost like, and this is actually a really compelling idea from neuroscience, from research. It's almost like the brain might sometimes eventually be so overwhelmed that has a crisis of confidence. Like its job is to keep us in balance. And after one stress too many, it's like, screw this. Like, this is too much, too overwhelming. I quit. I can't do my job anymore. I can't like process all this information traveling towards me. And the nerdy language for that is like, we lose allostatic self efficacy. That just means the brain's like, I can't keep you in balance. And in response to that kind of confidence crisis, the brain responds by being very, very rigid,
mm,
but better safe than sorry. Like a good, robust response from the brain and the body to uncertainty is like the sickness response and is to activate the immune
Yeah.
system. Like too much is going on. We can't really compute it all. So let's default to predicting the worst, right? The worst is the world is unsafe. There's too many demands
Yeah.
on us. There's probably viruses or bacterial infections. And the world inside of us, we do not have the resources to deal with it. So I'm just going to shut you down for a while, basically. That's what it seems to
Yeah.
me that, quite a compelling explanation for what might be happening. I
Yeah,
hope
that
that
makes a
makes
lot of
some kind of
sense.
sense.
It does. I find this fascinating. I am on the
Mm,
edge of my seat. I could listen to you explain this all day. The crisis of confidence. It's such a great way to understand it. It's a system in overload, and too many alarms are going off, and it's like, okay,
yeah.
shut down. We're going into full lockdown here until we can get a sense that everything's better and okay. But until
Mm.
then, we're just, yeah,
Literally, yeah, full
yeah,
lockdown, like a state of emergency. And again, in
yeah.
the science, people talk about central sensitization. You may have heard of that one. There's the
Hmm.
idea that then the central nervous system, which is really the brain, becomes hypersensitive. It's just like freaked out. If there's been one stress too many, it's like, sorry, I just don't trust you anymore. Like
Yeah,
you need to shut down. And because it's that better safe than sorry thing, we just need to remember like it's miserable and it's creating this lasting, persistent sickness response, all these horrible symptoms, and like a heightened sensitivity to us doing things. Like if we dare try, step out the front door and go for a walk, it's going to
mm,
punish us, right?
yeah,
It's trying to protect us, it's trying to keep us safe because it's working only on its predictions in that situation. It's not listening to the raw data from the body. At least that's what a lot of the research is showing. And, it's
yeah,
it's so fascinating. And the upshot of it all is that if the brain is effectively this manager that's having a confidence crisis and is freaking out and, inadvertently making our life miserable, how would you respond to someone who's just overwhelmed and having a crisis of confidence and
yeah,
probably needs some love, right? Some compassion and some empathy
yeah,
and patience and like, oh, sorry,
yeah,
brain. Yeah, I was not
yeah,
listening. I need to do better.
yeah, yeah, like, asked you for help 27 times and you ignored me, like, I've been warning you."
Yeah. And then I go
Oh,
back
right.
to like, yeah, why did I
What
not seek help sooner? Right.
Yeah, yeah, from when you were 7, we have to start digging things out.
Mhm.
Yeah, and we can see the predictive processing. I love this because it helps us see it helps us understand better how these symptoms can come on, and we have everyday examples of this in our life, like thinking that our brain is not reacting to what's around us, it's predicting what's going to happen and
Mhm.
acting accordingly, which makes a lot more sense because to wait to react puts us in a lot more danger. And I was listening to a talk at a conference on it was from the Association for the Treatment of Neuroplastic Symptoms, and there was a woman talking
Mm.
about how she was in her office and the room started to shake and she went into a full-blown panic and was sure it was a massive earthquake and was terrified. But someone had turned the dryer on in another room. So, the brain
Wow.
took in some things
Yeah.
and made a prediction and it was wrong. And, this happens. We see it in our life all the time where we panic and we freak out over
Mm.
something that is nothing. And we're thinking, what is
Yeah.
happening? Why did I get so scared of that? And then with these conditions, we can see, it just has to happen a couple of times where, oh, I went for a
Mm.
long walk and I didn't feel well. And then the next day, you're like, I'm going to try a bike ride. And your brain's predicting,
Mm.
well, the walk wasn't safe. So the bike ride probably isn't either. So let's give some
Yeah.
symptoms. And it just compounds. And before you know it, everything in the world has been coded as danger and it keeps
Totally.
predicting
Yeah.
accordingly. Yeah.
Such good examples. Like I think of it sometimes like the brain is like this meteorologist or this weather forecaster with godlike powers. Not only can it predict the weather, but it can create the weather.
Oh,
And
I like that.
so with MECFS, it kind of just defaults to predicting storms because we've been living through storms for
Yeah.
too long, even though we didn't even realize it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's our job to kind of gently allow the brain to start to notice some of the signals that hey, it might not always be raining. Maybe
Yeah.
there's some sun, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I know too that you've talked about, and we talk about that quite a bit here, that we see some common personality traits, and you've alluded
Mm,
to some of your own that you feel were contributing to this. So,
mm,
how do you see that connection with people facing conditions like ME/CFS and long COVID and all the other neuroplastic or the chronic symptom
mm.
syndromes? Yeah.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating and compelling question. Like perfectionism, people pleasing, hyper responsibility, self
Yeah.
sacrifice, desire to achieve, not letting people down. How is it that all of these traits could contribute to a physical illness? It seems strange, right? But
Hmm.
maybe a good place to start is just thinking, why would anyone learn to live that way? When we talk
Yeah.
about personality traits, it sounds like there are these kind of permanent fixtures of our
Yeah.
psyche, but I think it's more accurate to think about them as learned patterns of behavior. They're ways of
Mm.
meeting the world. And, not always, everyone's different, of course, but I would say for the most part, we learn to meet the world in this way because that's what the world required of us. And
Yeah.
particularly when I'm thinking about my experiences, but also the experiences of people I work with, stuff going on in their lives, usually when they were pretty young, taught them to some degree that in order to get their needs met, they needed to be untroubled and good and helpful and responsible and maybe quite attuned to other people around them. So, it's not really a choice for a young person, especially for a child. Like, do I be really authentic and listen to myself and communicate my emotions and my needs, or do I do what my caregivers need me to do or to be, or
Yeah.
other not just my parents but my environment. Do I listen to that? It's never a choice, right? If it's attachment versus authenticity, attachment wins 10 out of 10 because that's what we need to survive, right? And it's
Yeah.
only later on that we start to unravel that stuff. But yeah, why is it that all of the above contributes to being ill? Wow. I think it goes back to like the brain's main job. The brain's main job is to keep the body in balance. And, the more that we're disconnecting from our own needs by serving others, not that we can't serve others, but if it's rigidly and to the detriment of our own needs, that there's no balance in our lives, that we're rigidly perfectionistic and that anything less than perfection is, the end of the world, then there's something
Mhm.
fatally like unsustainable about that. It doesn't take a neuroscientist or even a psychologist to know that, right? It's kind of exhausting to live that way. But more scientifically, like we're undermining the brain, sorry. The poor old brain is trying to keep us in balance. But we're not really helping it by kind of living in that way, right? Living in
Mhm.
disconnection from our core needs.
Yeah, and a lot of it seems to come down to safety and these personalities. And I love that you broke down that they are learned behaviors because
Mm,
most of us, for most of our lives, have felt that these things are unchangeable. So it's very empowering and
mm,
exciting to know that we can rewire these things, just like so many other things. But a lot of it seems to be around like, I am safe and accepted and okay in the world if the people around me are happy, like let's make them
mm,
happy at all costs because that's how I'm going to be okay and I'm going to be safe in the tribe and they're going to let me stay, or I'm okay in the world if I have enough achievements, like I'm not
mm, mm.
enough, I'm not, people aren't going to like me, like it's just, there's, I think there's a threat response that kicks in when we come
Totally.
at things, the intention that we come at things, because we have ultra
Mm,
marathon runners who never get CFS, and we have many, many, many who do. We have a
right.
disproportionate number of marathon runners who get these conditions. And
Mm,
it seems to be not so much about pushing yourself to do these things, but what is the internal voice saying about doing these things? And at what cost are you doing them? And what does it mean to you if you don't do them and you don't accomplish it?
so
This
true.
is
Yeah.
this is probably a bit of an exaggeration, but one thing that I always notice, and I think this is perhaps a bit of, hyperbole, it's not always the case, but every time I see a car with a bumper sticker that says, proud parent of an honor student, I think, future CFS patient. Because that person is getting those messages early
Oh
on, like,
man.
I'm
Yeah.
okay, I'm accepted, I am good
Yeah.
enough, I have
Yeah.
value, I am liked when I
Mhm.
achieve. Like, they got honors once and they're like, this is the thing. So now I
Right.
need to go on and get 19 degrees. And of course, that's
Yeah.
not the case. And it's well intentioned. And I don't mean to make any parents feel bad because I know they're just trying to be proud mamas and papas. But
100%.
yeah,
Yeah, no, it's such a
yeah,
good point, Raelan. And you're right to acknowledge, like we wire it, the brain predicts that if we don't live
yeah,
up to those expectations, then it's literally a threat, right? And that goes back
yeah,
to that attachment thing. You know,
yeah.
our survival depends on our relationship with our caregivers. Having said all of that, it's not about throwing mum and dad or anyone's parents under the bus.
No,
Everyone tries the best they can and they have their own
yeah.
stuff to deal with. And ultimately it's stuff that goes on inside of us. We
Mhm.
process, we make these expectations, or our brain does, and we also have the capacity to kind of unlearn them and
Yeah.
become a lot more flexible.
So I know we've talked about a lot of the core things that you've seen the research is showing is leading to these conditions. Are there any other key things that you think it's important for people to understand that impact our experience with this?
Yeah, I think one thing that I'd like to share is just something that I was really fascinated by. I just came across a little while ago. There was a research study of people with ME/CFS. It's always good to have things validated that we kind of know intuitively, but to get that stamp of scientific credibility. But in this study, they found that people that they worked with ME/CFS were more prone to suppressing emotions. Like no one watching this is
Mm.
going to be that surprised by that, right? But not only that, but it was an experimental study. They had a group of people with ME/CFS and a healthy control group. And they found not only did the people with ME/CFS suppress more, but when they did suppress their emotions more, their nervous system was more activated than the healthy control group when they were set a challenge which required them to suppress their emotions, which blew my mind because
Wow.
physiologically, those of us who get these kind of illnesses, when we suppress our emotions, there's greater nervous system activation, which is
Mm.
obviously more taxing for the body, yeah, which is crazy. And it just gives us a bit more sense of legitimacy. Because as I said
Yeah.
before, when we talk about emotional work, it sounds a bit woo woo, but actually, no, there's measurable differences. Like when we suppress our emotions, and we have done all our lives, we probably, if we're intentionally suppressing, and we talked about how we might just never have learned to feel our emotions, but if we're intentionally suppressing, we probably tell ourselves like that we can't handle the emotion. But this is kind of evidence that actually suppressing them is more draining for our nervous system. I know
Wow.
that's something I hear from clients. It's like when I'm kind of nudging them to connect to these emotions, they're like, I
Hmm.
don't think I have the capacity. And I'm like, hey, suppressing them is more draining for your system, I'm arguing.
Yeah.
And actually, I'm not saying that we all have to just like push through and feel our emotions right now, but just an acknowledgement that we're going back to the brain. The brain sends us these emotions. They're survival programs. They're usually communicating something really important, and we need to honor them. We need to respond to them. And the brain's going to be quite happy when we do that. And that, we
Yeah.
feel that it creates this kind of balance, this regulation. And it's just one more piece of the puzzle for so many people that helps this overwhelmed brain that's in this crisis, confidence crisis, that's in a state of emergency, just think,
Yeah.
ah, they're listening now. Okay, so maybe we can update some of those predictions.
I think of it like spending decades playing whack-a-mole. Do you know this game?
Yeah.
So, and each one of those moles is one of your emotions, and you're just constantly like, get down, get down, get down, get down, get down. And they keep popping up. And it's just a full time job keeping them
Mm.
down. And letting them go is someone saying, like, we're going to shut the game off. You don't, we're just going to let them out. You're
Yeah,
done. Because it is
exactly.
exhausting. It is really exhausting. And I
100%.
think every person I talk to, and I believe you even said something similar earlier, either before we were recording or a while, but just how much lighter you feel when you
Yeah,
start to release some of these
right.
things.
And
Yeah.
there's clear physiological pathways for that. Like, yeah,
Yeah.
this mind body unity. The brain. Someone described in a book I read recently, the brain is like a chat room where the mind and the body communicate. And yeah, when we listen to the signals the brain is sending us, our conscious mind, we're acknowledging them. Okay, I got the message. I know I've been ignoring it for 30 years, but I'm going to do something about it. And it doesn't mean I need to have some big reckoning or some scary conversation with real people in my life. It might be. It might also mean that I just acknowledge it and feel it and write about it and vent and dance around to energetic
Mm.
music whilst shouting or, it's all good.
I could keep you here all day, and I promise I won't. But another big theme that comes up is this feeling of disconnection from self.
Mm, yeah.
So, what is happening there, and how is that a factor with these conditions?
Yeah, I would say disconnection from self is perhaps like a core theme, right? Because when we look at those personality traits, those ways of meeting the world, what do they all have in common along with emotional suppression? It's like I'm disconnecting from my own body, from my own feelings, from my own needs. And so that's why, reconnecting to ourselves is arguably like not a bad, headline for what we need to do in order to recover. And I remember watching recovery videos in which someone described, yeah, I was disconnected from myself. I needed to reconnect and just thinking that didn't sound very scientific. Um, because that's the
Yeah.
way my brain was thinking. But
Yeah.
the more I think about it, I'm like, that's entirely consistent with this kind of wider model where the brain is trying to keep us in balance. It's sending us messages in the form of emotions and symptoms. And the more that we're disconnecting from those messages, the more we're contributing to this state of overwhelm and imbalance, this kind of unsustainable way where the brain can't do its job. And, the more that we can reverse that cycle, have these corrective experiences where, for example, I
Yeah.
learn that it's okay for me to have boundaries with other human beings and they're not going to, cease communication with me. And if they do, then that's okay. That's their problem. That's a big deal for my brain. It's
Yeah.
making the world a lot more predictable and understandable.
Yeah. So I'm really excited to hear about the work that you're doing. And I know I said this before we started recording because I thought, wow, I'm so sorry that you've had to go through this. But if you had to go through it, just the combination of your professional experience and your personal experience and all of that coming together. So, how has that shaped what you do now? And what kind of support and things do you have available for people who are going through these conditions, facing these conditions?
Oh, well, it's really nice of you to ask. I mean, I work one on one at the moment, predominantly with people with
Mm.
these conditions, and I guess the main pillars of the work are the main things we've talked about. I mean, it's really
Mm.
getting that coherent understanding, grounded in science as much as possible. In psychology language, whereas medical doctors tend to diagnose, psychologists we formulate. So we work out a working kind of explanation that's very unique to that individual for what's going on. And we think about the predisposing factors, the precipitating factors, the presenting factors, the protective and the perpetuating. Lots of words beginning with P as it happens. And once we got that understanding in place, then we kind of borrow from pain reprocessing therapy. We change the relationship with symptoms in the knowledge that there's very likely nothing irreversibly wrong with our body, that we can create the conditions for the brain to turn the volume down. We do somatic tracking, we do stuff like that. But for the most part, the people I work with have often done a lot of these brain retraining programs, and they may
Mhm.
have had some benefit, but it hasn't been sufficient. So I guess we could say we do the deeper work. We do a lot of trauma work for people who
Mm.
would benefit from that. I use EMDR and emotional awareness and expression therapy, internal family systems. We work with those ways of meeting the world, those parts that have learned to meet the world in those sort of ways. And we help to allow people to reconnect with their true self. I have to acknowledge though that I'm quite oversubscribed. So if you're watching and
Oh
you'd like
no.
to work with me, I'm really sorry. And also my partner's having a baby soon, so I'm taking some time off. But
Oh my goodness. I don't know if anyone noticed, I just discreetly tried to write something down, and it was a note to myself because I have my own recovery program, but it's group and people need one-on-one stuff. I'm like, I need to follow
Mm,
up with you later and see if I can
mm.
send some people your way.
Oh,
All
that's so
right.
sweet. I mean,
Ah,
in the longer term, I really want to try and get involved in research because I think the bigger
mm,
picture is like it's so cool and brilliant and exciting that there are all these amazing people doing whatever work they're doing, offering courses, groups, individual work. But I'd like to see a future where in my country, the National Health Service offers this stuff for free. That's how it should be.
yeah.
And, fingers crossed, that can become a reality. And I'm starting to see that in the pain world.
Mm,
So I think there's every reason that can happen, but the evidence, the research needs to be there. I'd like to get involved in that as well. Yeah, but I have a blog on Psychology Today, in which I try and write about some of the science and try and make it halfway understandable.
All right. Well, we'll make sure all of this is linked in the video description so people can have access to your blog. So even if they can't, if they're interested in working with you and can't get in right away, I know you still have a lot of great resources for people. And I imagine there's a wait list, or it's still at some point you will be taking on some new clients. So we'll make sure all of that is there. Dr. Hollis, every word of this has been pure gold. I would have you back 1,000 times. Open invitation.
Mhm.
Thank you for being here. You've really helped increase my understanding, and I'm sure that of so many others. Just really appreciate you taking the time to share all of this with us. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thank you, Raylan. Like, honestly, what you do for the community is unparalleled. It's amazing. And yeah, my own recovery would not have happened in the way that it did without you. So I can't thank you enough. It's such a pleasure to be here. And when I was ill, recovery stories were such a huge deal for me. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely my honor. And thank you to everyone who's watching. I really encourage you to take a few moments and just check out some of the links from Dr. Hollis because he really is insightful and knowledgeable on recovery in these conditions. And there's a lot of great information for you there. So thanks for watching. All the best to those of you out there. Keep going. You've got this. And that's it for today. Bye, everyone.